Ever wondered how you can shoot film photos using your digital camera or just your smartphone? Well, in this video I am going to answer that question. But for that, we need to go outside and snap some photos first. So let's roll that intro. Today's video is sponsored by Dehancer. Dehancer is in short a plugin for Photoshop, Lightroom, and it's also available on iOS as well as for video editing, but more on that in a later video. And basically what it does is emulating that you shot your photos using film photography. Honestly, I don't know too much about film photography because I never practiced it myself. The grasses are pretty tall today. Before they start cutting them up, I'm going to try and shoot some moody photos in the field, creating that old farm vibe and mysterious vibe. I don't know yet, but we will see in the photo shoot, and I see you back inside when we will edit them together. So this first photo shoot was really hectic simply because there was plenty of wind, so I did limit my talking outside and I did focus on snapping some photos, which was pretty hard as well because I really had to run back and forth to my camera to check whether the photos were in focus or not. I hope you really enjoyed a bit of the behind the scenes footage, and let's jump into Photoshop and Lightroom right now to edit some of those photos. But first let me talk about the purpose of this video. This video is sponsored by Dehancer. Dehancer is basically a plugin built for Photoshop, Lightroom Classic, Affinity Photo and Capture One, to all the main photo editing software packages that are out there. And what it does is it emulates film photography and applies the effect on your digital photos. The plugin is available for both Microsoft Windows and MacOS systems. That being said, let's start with some technical info about this plugin. When arriving on the website of Dehancer, you can clearly see that you are welcomed by this banner because they recently launched their app for the iPad Pro and the iPad and the iPhones. I really hope they will release an Android app in the future as well. And then next you can see that they both have a video plugin as well as a photo plugin available. The video plugin, I will discuss that in a future video, so let's focus now on the photo plugin. And I'm going to keep it really short here because I have much to talk about in the next parts of the video. Let me explain to you what this plugin costs and what it includes. As you can see here on the main page of their website, it currently includes about 63 film profiles. So that means that it can emulate 63 different types of film that were used in the past. I have to say I don't know too much about film photography because I never practiced it myself, but I believe that they are pretty accurate when reading some reviews over on the internet. They are also constantly expanding everything, so it won't be limited to those 63. The price tag is about $200, which might sound pretty expensive, but you have to take into account that this basically replaces analog photography, so you won't have to buy any new analog camera, or if you have one, you don't need to pay for developing your films, and you don't need to pay for your film photos as well. So you can basically use your smartphone or your digital camera, snap as much photos as you'd like to, and you're done with only $200. It's not that expensive if you take those costs into account. So $200, and with that you get the plugin for both Photoshop, Lightroom Classic, Capture One, Affinity Photo, as well as access to the app. And it's a lifetime license, which is available in 2 seats, and basically what this means is that they provide you 2 keys which you can use on 2 different systems at the same time. You can always activate or deactivate a key or a seat and submit it on a different computer or different software account, so you will be able to use the plugin on 2 different systems at the same time. I think reducing that price to 100 USD really isn't too expensive for using this plugin on 2 different systems. But that's my humble opinion, and it depends on what you're going to use this software for in the first place. Enough of talking, let me discuss what you get once you downloaded this plugin. First of all, you will get a really comprehensive guide that really explains you step by step on how to install this extension for either Photoshop, Lightroom, Affinity Photo, Capture One. It does touch every single item. It explains you where it's installed, what it installs, and how you can deinstall everything. No secrets, no tricks. It explains you step by step how you should install everything. And then once you set up everything, it also gives you some suggestions on how to change your default settings in Photoshop or Lightroom, so you can get started right away and you can easily launch the plugin from your favorite editing software. I'm going to edit everything in Lightroom, but basically the app you launch once you start the plugin is the same app. It's just a program where you start from that changes. But I'm going to show you in short notice how you can launch the app or the plugin from either Photoshop or Lightroom Classic. Just remember guys, it's Lightroom Classic and not the classical Lightroom app you can use on both your smartphone as well as cloud-based photo editing on your desktop. Opening up Photoshop, I'm going to open, for instance, this photo. You don't need in particular a RAW photo, but it's most recommended to use RAW photos because you have most freedom and most details available of your shot, and it's way less destructive to edit a photo starting from a RAW photo instead of a JPEG. But both options are available. And then yeah, you can see I just opened this drone photo, which is a DNG file, so a RAW file, and then you instantly get your camera raw editing opened up in Photoshop. I'm gonna leave everything like this because I simply want to show you how you can launch the app in Photoshop. And basically it's really simple. You just go to filter, and then all the way to the lower part of this menu you get Dehancer Film, the plugin. It will launch the plugin and then you are set to go. Now I'm not gonna show you anything else in Photoshop because I prefer to edit my photos in Lightroom. So that being said, I already did make a brief selection of some photos I took during the shoot, and I am going to edit a few of them step by step with you guys. And one important thing I really need to mention is that this plugin also comes with a really extensive guideline, and basically what this guide shows you is a step-by-step guide on how you need to adjust your color profiles, how you need to set your settings whenever you want to edit photos with the Dehancer plugin. So basically from start to finish, it explains you all tools and gives you tips and tricks on how to edit photos and how to import and export them. I'm gonna touch them briefly because basically it's all written up in that document, but I'm going to follow that guide and I'm going to explain to you what really important is for using the plugin in the first place. And it's really easy. So for instance, this is a JPEG file I took with my smartphone, the Motorola Edge 30 Ultra. I'm not gonna do too much editing before I jump straight into the plugin, but I do recommend you, based on my personal experience, to do some brief editing, or if you want to apply a certain style, to do that first if you want to go a creative way. If you want to stick to the typical film styled photos, then don't do too much. The only things that they recommend is to adjust the exposure before going to the Dehancer plugin. And most of the time they reduce it by 1. So I'm just gonna do that for this photo, but just remember guys, you don't need to stick to it exactly. Basically you need to underexpose the photo a little bit so it won't be blown out in the Dehancer app. But it all depends on how you shot the photo and what the camera settings were in the first place. Then the contrast, we're gonna drop that to about -40. You can clearly see this is a document it comes with, and you can clearly see that it shows you how to import the settings, how you install the plugin straight in Lightroom. It suggests you which formats you need to use, what color space, what bit depth and things like that. And then here you can see what kind of settings it really suggests before you start using the plugin in the first place. So -40 for the contrast. And then they ask us to push up the black tint to about 60. The colors profile, I can't change that to Adobe Color or Adobe Standard because this is a JPEG file. I'm gonna leave that. Don't touch anything else. We will leave the color tint curve to a linear curve, and that's pretty much it for exporting our photo to Dehancer. And it's really simple to launch the app or the plugin from Lightroom. Just press with the right mouse button on your photo and then you go to edit in external program, and then you have Dehancer as an option. And then a new prompt will pop up, and basically this tells you to start editing a copy with your Lightroom adjustments. Just edit a copy or the original. I suggest you always pick the first one. Then really important, the format should be TIFF, sRGB color space, 16 bits per component, and the resolution should be around 240. We won't do any compression, and then we start by hitting edit. And then you're greeted with this beautiful plugin, and basically it's a different piece of software that's available within the Lightroom or Photoshop architecture. So let me explain the interface a bit first. On the left hand side you have a bunch of presets which are developed by the Dehancer team or a few creators. You can really start playing around with those and start by editing one of the presets, and you can easily navigate through the different presets by hitting the lower or upper arrow keys on your keyboard, and that way it instantly applies the effects, and you can get really creative with them. We're not gonna do that, we are going to start from scratch. You can also see you can go back to the original edit and you can basically apply the last edit you did by yourself, which is saved here. You can also save your own presets and things like that, so it's pretty similar to the workflow in Lightroom. Then on the left hand side you also have this button which shows you on how to change profiles. Those are the 63 camera profiles which are currently available for this plugin. And here on this icon you can update any of your film profiles, so once they are available or there are updated versions they will pop up here. And then you have some license info where you can see some more details about your seeds and about your what the status of your activation is basically. You can also hide that panel, that's this button. This is a history tracker, so basically what it does is it restores the last used settings, so it's the same as with the presets, that it restores your last edit and applies the last edit onto your new photo. Then this is just reset everything to the defaults, and then you have an undo button and a redo button. Then here you can hide these color curves, you can zoom fit, so basically what this does is it zooms in your photo. What I don't like about that button is that you cannot zoom with a magnification glass like you can do in Lightroom. So that's my suggestion for the future, that they make it available so you can scroll zoom on your photo in a certain area if you want that. Then you have the preview. Basically what this does, this box applies and hides the effect, so it replaces the before and after effect on the photo. And then on the right side of the screen you have all the different items you can use to edit your photo, similar to how Lightroom works. Regarding the interface, Dehancer suggests you the following, and that's to start with the development of your raw photo in Lightroom. Then apply the different settings they recommend, like I did show you, and then it's all about adjusting the source correction. So basically what this does, you have the exposure compensation, temperature compensation, tint compensation, and defringe radius and defringe itself. I'm gonna briefly touch them. I'm not gonna explain every single item because it's gonna be a way too long video for that, but all these items are explained in their documentation and on their website as well. What exposure compensation does is you can further optimize the exposure of your photo. Temperature compensation and tint is basically the same as how you can adjust the white balance in Lightroom. So I'm not gonna touch that too much. I'm gonna make it a bit warmer and give it a slightly bluish tint. And then here you can see I do have some color aberration, basically because of the camera, which was in this case my smartphone, and the defringe function basically helps to reduce that effect a bit, because one of the settings you can play around with is the halation and bloom effect, and these can be affected by chromatic aberration, and we don't want that too much. So if it ever starts to interfere with each other, you can play around with the defringe function, and that way you can try to reduce that chromatic aberration, so these blue tints here. And then they basically suggest you to pick a profile, for instance like this one, and then you can push pull EV. So basically what this does is it plays around with exposure levels. So on their website they state that they have 3 different levels. So you have the neutral ones, then you have slightly underexposed and slightly overexposed. Obviously you can play around with this. Okay, I do like this one. So this is all based on personal taste, because I don't know too much about analog photography in the first place. Next we go to the expand settings, and expand basically you can play around with the blacks and the whites, and that way you can change the dynamic range of your photo. So this slider will crush the blacks, and I want this old vintage look, so that's perfect for this photo. And then the white points, I'm going to blow up the white points a little bit, and I'm gonna change this color mode to Luma. And then we move on to the print section, and in this print section you can play around with the medium you want your photo to be printed on. This is an emulation, so you don't need to print it in reality, but you can clearly see you can pick several different types of medium. This Kodak print, for instance, and then you can play around with the settings. You can play around with the color density if you want a bit more color. For instance, I do want some. If you want some finer adjustments, you can play around with this analog range limiter as well, and here you can also adjust the exposure and things like that. And then they suggest you go back to the expand tool, because based on the medium you choose, the black and white points might change a bit, so you can play around with those again. And this color head tool is basically what this does is what it's called. it changes the colors a little bit. So I'm gonna exaggerate and it will introduce yellow if I go to yellow side and blue to the yellow. So basically this is if you want to play a bit more creative, you can change the colors of the overall photo here. So that's how you can play around with those settings. I'm going to give it this warmer tone by introducing a bit more yellow, a bit more magenta, and I think this is the final result. And then you all have some creative tools available. For instance, you can introduce some grain, and that way you simulate that it's an analog shot, and you can really play around and get creative with those effects. Then you have halation. Yeah, it basically creates red orange typed halo effects around light sources. For instance, the reflections of the sun on the shed here create this halation effect. And what's really nice is for this effect is that you can use mask mode. And mask mode basically shows you how this effect affects your photo. So it shows you, like in Lightroom, how much of the effect will apply on your photo. You can amplify the effect, and with that slider you can basically play around and reduce the effect if that's even necessary. Just one remark, and that's a little bug I did discover: you always need to take off the mask mode effect, because once you press here on OK and you export the photo back to Lightroom and you still have the mask mode turned on, your photo will basically be black and showcasing only the halation effect mask. So that's a little bug I did discover, so be careful about that. And then bloom and halation most often are combined with each other. You also have the mask mode, and what this does, it basically will create a bloom effect at the border of very contrasty rich areas. So in this case, where you have a light source and contrast with darker shadows. So in most cases, both of those effects go hand in hand with each other. This can get a bit tricky with differentiated areas like here with chromatic aberrations, so that's something you need to take into account as well. And then last but not least, you have vignette. And vignette, this is basically the same effect as in Lightroom, and you have several sliders that you help to adjust the vignetting as well. So then all we need to do is press OK, and our photo will be exported to a new file in Lightroom. That's something tricky as well, because that way if you're working with different folders in Lightroom and you are playing around with the library with some filters applied. For instance, I rate my photos with 5 stars and then I only edit those 5-star photos. Well, since it's creating a new photo, basically it won't have that rating, for instance, and it will not be present in that listing. So that's a little minor remark I have. Sometimes you will have to look for your edited photo afterwards. And that is basically the way of working. I have to say I really like it. It's a bit difficult at the start. You will need some time to get your hands on all the features, and yeah, you need to start playing around with it, and yeah, it takes a while before you get to know the software and what the plugin is capable of. But once you know everything, it's a really neat piece of software and extension on your Lightroom and Photoshop. So that was the first picture. Right now I'm going to repeat the same process to a raw photo I took with my Sony a7 III. Now, as I did show you the global workflow, I'm going to speed up the process a little bit and not talk as much as in the first edit. And for that edit, I'm going to pick one of my favorite photos. I will show you all the edits I did in the photo shoot later on in this video. But this was the end result I got, and I will show you right now how I managed to snap this photo. I positioned my tripod in front of this field of tall grasses. I put a self timer on the camera, I switched to manual focus, and I did focus on some of the taller grass springs that stood out from the grass field. I did focus on that one, and then I was running back and forth to that patch of grass basically and made sure I was in the correct position. Okay, so that's about taking the photo. This is the raw photo as how it came out of my camera. As you can see, it's way underexposed on the subject and a little bit overexposed on the sky. So first of all, what I always start with is correcting the horizon. And you can clearly see this wheat field here over here. The grass field isn't completely straight and I'm not standing in the center of the photo. So I'm going to play with that, and then I will apply the rule of thirds, and I always make sure that the eyes of the subject whenever I'm shooting a portrait are on one of those horizontal lines. Then I always go to color corrections and I tick off this box to apply the corrections of my lens. So we have some basic chromatic aberration that's fixed, some vignetting and some deformations caused by the lens. And then as this was shot with an ISO of 4000, it's still doable, but if I apply for instance some automatic corrections right here, then you can clearly see there's a lot of noise on me. So I did correct that noise with the new noise reduction tool, which is optimization performed by artificial intelligence. And this brings me back to the video from last week, but this time this is how software really benefits us photographers since artificial intelligence is introduced. So this takes about 25 seconds on my computer. Considering what it does, it's not that long, but I'm pretty sure the newer Mac machines will do this in a way shorter time span. Now, and then the first thing, like I said before, you need to adjust several parameters according to what Dehancer suggests you to do before going to the app. And I once did a test in which I didn't follow those guidelines and the photo was totally rubbish and I was not able to play around too much with the filters. So that's one thing you need to keep in mind. You can do adjustments like I do right now, but don't get too excited with them because otherwise you won't be able to play around with Dehancer too much anymore. The sky is way too overexposed, so I'm going to create a mask, select the sky, and then I will decrease the exposure right here. And then I'm gonna play a bit more with the shadows because I want to get more of that pop of those colors in the sky. And I can add a bit more color by playing around with the tints as well. Then increase the saturation as well. And then what I didn't like was the saturation of the green tone, so I'm going to drop that as well, and you can clearly see it has some blue tints as well, so I'm going to play around with that and drop the green and aqua tones a little bit. So in that way it's already looking much better. And then push the orange and reds a little bit, the magenta and the purple tones, so the sky really pops. And that's a basic edit. I can play around here with the shadows and add a bit more pink tints to that, like this. So this way I'm going to use the Dehancer tool obviously more in a creative way and not exactly as how it's basically designed to work. This is more like the way I would use this plugin. Okay, and right now I did do some basic adjustments. I'm just gonna introduce a little bit more contrast, even though Dehancer suggests you to use a linear curve without any adjustments. I just will leave the photo as it is right now. And then they say that you need to switch the color profile to Adobe Standard, so I'm gonna do that. This will flatten out the image a little bit, but that's fine. And then we will decrease the exposure. Normally they suggest -1, but for this photo you can clearly see it's quite dark, so I'm going to switch it to -80 and we will see how that will turn out. Then the contrast -40, and then we will push the black tones to 60%. Pretty curious what this will do with the final photo. And then right mouse button, edit in Dehancer. And then we will leave all these settings as how they should be. TIFF file, sRGB, color space, 16 bits depth, We will edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustments and no compression. The resolution should be set at least to 240. And then after it opens up in Dehancer, you can clearly see this is the before. This was the last edit I did on the previous photo with the Motorola Edge 30 Ultra. And right now I'm going to apply a preset first, because I want it to have that green tint, and you can already see, for instance, I will pick this one. So right now this was a preset I did select, so not a camera profile, but I will do the same editing right now. So start off with the exposure compensation in the source settings. I'm going to increase the saturation, increase the warmer tones, and add some more purple tints in it as well. We won't need to do any differentiating because the place where the highlights and the darkest shadows come in contact with each other are completely clean, like you can see here, which is in my case the sky, which was blown up in the raw photo and which is now corrected in post, and the subject me, which was a bit underexposed, but you can clearly see there's no differentiating happening here. And then we will go straight to the print medium, and I'm going to check. Yeah, I do like this glossy paper. You can clearly see by changing the medium of the print, the entire photo starts to change again. I'm going to check the profile that was seen still. We can play around with that as well, the EV, okay. The black points, I didn't touch the black points because they were already good in my opinion. The only thing that bothers me is this. I'm going to check whether I can fix that a little bit. Okay, the color head, I'm going to reduce the amount of magenta a little bit and introduce a bit more cyan because I want this colder look in the photo. And then the film grain, I don't think there is enough of film grain in the photo, so I'm going to increase the particle size a little bit. And then I am going to switch that to digital mode, and digital mode is basically a simulation completely done digitally. It changes the look a little bit compared to analog photography, and I think analog photography still feels a bit more natural than the digital one. But nonetheless, I'm going to apply the digital one. And then I do love the halation effect, and I'm going to apply the mask here. You can clearly see, even though I applied this preset, this halation effect is not visible on the photo. So I'm going to increase the amplification, and then the background gain. Basically what this does is it isolates the halation effect from the background. So whenever your background is quite busy, which is the case in this photo, you won't have too much of halation. And then the global diffusion, okay, should be, and then the local diffusion, and I don't know why I still can't see. The impact should be increased as well. Okay, and right now you can see I did over exaggerate, but if you apply the mask you can clearly see it's too strong, the effect. But I most often suggest, if you want to apply halation and you can't see the effect too much, you want it to be quite notable, then you're better off by increasing the global diffusion and the amplification a lot, and then you start decreasing the effects until you are satisfied with the final look. And I think this is already way better. Now I'm gonna smooth out the effect, increase the background gain, and then the source limiter so it's not that strong. And then the blue compensation, what this does is it basically compensates whenever you have chromatic aberration, like I told you before, and it's blue. Then you can play around with this slider, and this slider will reduce that as well. So it's a bit same as the differential option in the beginning of the editing. And make sure you switch off the mask, because if you press OK right now, the photo will be exported as a black screen with just the halation effect visible. And then the same for the bloom effect, so amplification, impact, let's increase that, source limiter, okay, and as you can see it's way too much, so I'm gonna drop the details a lot. And that's it regarding the bloom effect. And then the vignetting, I think I'm gonna increase the vignetting a little bit, and this noise, I think the size is a bit too much. I'm going to switch back to normal, to analog mode as well. So that's it for this photo, and then if you hit OK, you will see it creates a new file, and this is the result after exporting it to Lightroom again. And I did play around a bit more with several other photos. I'm going to pop them up on screen right now. This, for instance, is a photo of Iceland, so you can apply it to landscape photography as well. This is just my hand, where you can clearly see the highlights here contain a lot of the bloom and halation effect, so that's the red borders you see around the contrast areas. And then here I did apply some effects as well, and I really love that vintage sepia look, so I always, in most cases, went for that type of look when simulating film. Some more creative shots, and then here the final photo I just took. And then I played around with some lights in the forest as well. These photos weren't too good either, but nonetheless I think it creates in some way a mysterious vibe, and I really love that about the plugin. So to summarize up, guys, Dehancer is, in my opinion, a really great plugin for those who want to play around with some creative techniques to emulate film photography, but they want to get rid of the whole technical stuff behind it. So you don't need to develop anything anymore. You don't need to bring thousands of different camera rolls or film rolls with you. You don't need to pay for those anymore. So Dehancer comes in with a steep price of $200, but I think they can justify that considering you can also do batch processing. It keeps growing, the plugin. It's available for iOS, it's available in Photoshop, Lightroom, Affinity, Capture One, so it's pretty extensive library that keeps growing. So I think you can justify the price tag with that. If you still love doing film photography and you want to stick to that, that's fine as well, but I think this is a really great approach to do it with digital cameras nowadays. It's up to you. Both things have their charms, but I think this is a great alternative that's available right now on the market. One of the things I do like about this plugin is that it includes, whenever you download it, a comprehensive guide. You can also download that before you decide to order the plugin. You can also try it for, I believe, 30 days for free, so that's also one great advantage you have. Or you can decide to buy it instantly and take that -10% discount. There is a code in the description down below. What I do like is that it also offers you some presets which are already developed, and you can start tweaking them out, or you can just save your own presets for later on. Batch processing through Photoshop is also a possibility, and that are one of the big advantages of using this plugin. Now let me talk about a few of the cons or little bugs I did still discover in the plugin, and one thing for sure is that, some basic functionalities are still missing in my opinion. For instance, hitting Command C is something I really do a lot in Lightroom or Photoshop. This shortcut is not available in the current version of this plugin from Dehancer, but there are undo and redo arrows, but you need to hit them with the mouse. So to speed up your workflow, using those shortcuts would be a really great improvement. And then one other thing I didn't like too much is the mask function. Well, let me explain. For instance, the halation and the bloom effect are not always clearly visible, so getting those options is really helpful. But it shouldn't be the case that if you hit apply mask and then forget to apply the mask or switch it off again and you hit OK, that the entire edit is screwed up because you only export the mask. So that might be a little thing that they can fix in a later update. It's just my personal opinion. If you ever want to re-edit some of your adjustments from the Dehancer plugin, you're not able to do that within the same TIFF file. So for instance, I did edit the last photo, and if I decide to, for instance, reduce the bloom effect, then I will need to go back to the raw photo first. Obviously it does save the last edits that were applied, so that way you can work around it. But if you edited a few photos and they were all edited in a different way, then it's not possible to go back to the Dehancer plugin without re-editing the entire photo in the plugin first. So that would be really interesting if they would be able to make that work. So you can switch back and forth between Lightroom and the Dehancer plugin. And then last but not least, a small minor thing. In Lightroom you can decide how much you zoom in a photo by using the scroll wheels or the command and scroll option. In Dehancer you can only zoom in to 1:1 ratio, so the original ratio the photo was taken in, and zoom out so the photo fills up the screen and fits the screen. So it would be possible to have some option in between that. But other than that, I really love the plugin, and I do know that the people behind Dehancer are really listening to their audience and listening to the people who use the app day in, day out. So guys, these are a few suggestions. The most important thing that I will remember about this video is that this opens up a lot of new doors for people who love film photography and want to play around with digital cameras instead of using only analog anymore. There are plenty of tutorials over on YouTube, over on the internet, on the website of Dehancer itself, as well as a comprehensive guide on their website. If you did get interested in the plugin, just check it out on their website right now. I will link everything in the description down below. And that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope you liked this video. If you did, please hit that like button. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, hit that subscribe button right here as well. And then the only thing that rests me to say is that you don't need to be great to start, but start to become great. See you in the next video. Bye! Oh, and in the next video we will talk about video editing with the Dehancer plugin. But that is for the future. Bye! MacOS and the Apple Store